Hello, hello, hello. Happy Sunday. I hope all is well with you. Today, we are exploring who you became to survive. Is it who you are meant to be? I'm super excited to get started with this. So let's go. This live is for the woman who has built an entire identity around survival and now doesn't know who she is without it. We're talking about the achiever, the strong one, the fixer, the overthinker, the independent one who doesn't need anyone, the one who always has a plan, always has an answer, always has it handled. And if I'm being honest, the one who doesn't even know how to fall apart anymore. You didn't choose those roles because you were glamorous. You didn't wake up at 12 years old and say, you know what, I'm going to be hyper independent and emotionally self sufficient forever. No, you chose those roles because they kept you safe, because someone had to be mature, someone had to be responsible, someone had to make it better, someone had to hold it together, and it became you. But here's the truth that might sting a little: the version of you that survived the chaos is not the version of you that gets to enjoy peace. The woman who built herself in emergency mode cannot be the same woman who built herself in safety. And tonight, we're separating survival identity from soul identity, because who you became to survive is not who you are meant to stay. So, let me tell you about the moment it hit me. I had just accomplished something big, one of those milestones that looks shiny from the outside, the kind of thing that people clap for, the kind of thing that gets congratulations, the kind of thing that you post about and someone says, wow, you're amazing. And I remember sitting there afterwards waiting to feel something. I wanted to feel joy, relief, excitement, validation, something. And there was nothing. No celebration in my body, no exhale, no warmth, just quiet, hollow, almost mechanical thought. Okay, what's next? Hi, Elsa. That's when it hit me. I wasn't building from joy. I was operating from survival. Achievement had become my armor, and had I had gotten so good at surviving that I didn't know how to feel safe enjoying. There was another moment too, the one that someone told me, you're so strong. And instead of feeling empowered, I felt tired, because what I heard underneath that compliment was, you be fine. You always are. No one asked if I wanted to be strong. No one asked if I was exhausted. No one asked if I was carrying too much. They just assumed I could. And the worst part was, I had built an identity around being the person who could. There was a season where I realized there's something else that scared me. I didn't know what I liked anymore. I knew what I was good at. I knew what people expected. I knew what I could handle. I knew what I could produce. But if you ask me, what do you enjoy? What feels light? What makes you feel soft? I would have blinked, because survival teaches you what works. Healing asks me what feels true. And I had been so busy being capable that I never learned how to be present. There was also the resting. I didn't know how to rest without anxiety. If my calendar was clear, my body wasn't calm, it was on alert. Silence didn't feel peaceful, it felt suspicious. I was missing something, like I should be preparing, like something bad was about to happen. But then that's when I realized that I had built a version of myself that could survive anything. But I had no idea how to be soft enough to enjoy anything. And that's the difference that we are unpacking tonight. Survival creates personalities. Healing reveals our identities. Survival says, who do I need to be so nothing breaks me? But healing says, who am I when I am no longer bracing? And that's terrifying because when your survival personality has been praised, rewarded, admired, letting it go feels like you're losing yourself. But what if you're not losing yourself? What if you are finally meeting her, the woman underneath the armor, underneath the hyper independence, underneath the constant doing, underneath the I got it? What if she's been waiting? It isn't about demonizing who you became. That version of you saved you, right? She was brilliant. She was adaptive. She was powerful, but she was built for chaos and crisis. And if you're no longer in crisis, you don't need to live like you are. So tonight we start the separation, not with shame, not with blame, but with awareness. And if you've been following me for a while, I believe that awareness is the first step to accident survival mode. But you start, right, you when you learn how to stop confusing protection with purpose, and you start asking a different question: if I'm no longer surviving, who am I meant to become? Who am I meant to be now? That is where we're going next. And I promise you, it's not about becoming weaker, it's about becoming who. If this is your first time joining me, my name is Letitia. I'm the Survival Made Disruptor. I am a trauma recovery mentor that facilitates disruptive, unapologetic transformations for high achieving women who are ready to exit survival mode and take radical ownership of their lives and their growth. And I love having conversations around the residual impact of trauma. I love having conversations about working through trauma and getting out of survival mode. And if you've been rocking with me for a while, you already know that we don't do surface level healing over here. We go deep, we go raw, and we get real uncomfortable in the name of truth, transformation, and disrupting every damn pattern that has kept us stuck. So, we're going to dive right in and we're going to be talking about the identity you built to survive. We just talked about that moment, the moment that I realized that I had built a version of myself that could survive anything, but I didn't know how to just be. But I want to go deeper now because survival mode doesn't just change your behavior, it reshapes your personality. And that's the part nobody talks about. You didn't just develop coping mechanisms, you developed an identity, a whole character, a curated version of yourself that made sure you would never feel powerless again. And over time, that character became you. But here's the truth: it wasn't your personality, it was your protection. And we have to be clear that survival builds identity, not just habits. When you grow up in chaos, inconsistency, emotional neglect, high expectations, or instability, your nervous system doesn't ask, how do I become authentic? It asks, is, how do I stay safe? And whatever works, it keeps, even if it costs you later. So let's break down some of the most common survival identities high achieving women build. And let's see which one feels most familiar for you. So I identify with being an overachiever. This is the woman who learned early that performance equals safety. Maybe she was praised for being smart. Maybe she got attention for being accomplished. Maybe success was the only time she felt seen. So she doubled down. Grades, degrees, promotions, titles, milestones. She became exceptional. But underneath the excellence was fear: fear of not being enough, fear of being overlooked, fear of being replaceable, fear of disappointing someone. Achievement wasn't just ambition, it was armor. She thought if I stay impressive, no one will leave. If I keep producing, I'll feel secure. But achievement didn't distract you from pain because it doesn't heal it. So, how many of us can relate to being the overachiever? Another one that I could relate to is the hyper independent one. This is the woman who learned I can rely on myself and that way I cannot be let down. Maybe she asked for help and didn't receive it. Maybe she watched caregivers be inconsistent. Maybe vulnerability was met with dismissal. So she stopped needing. She became capable, self sufficient, unshakable. She doesn't act, she doesn't lean, she doesn't wait for rescue. And from the outside, she looks powerful. But hyper independence is often grief in disguise. Because the truth is, she didn't become independent because she wanted to. She became independent because she had to. And now receiving feels foreign, resting feels unsafe, trusting feels risky. And that's not personality. Again, that's protection. And how many of us can relate to that? The next is the caretaker. And again, I was the best caretaker in the world. So the caretaker, this is the woman who became emotionally fluent early. She could read the room, sense tension, predict moods, anticipate needs. Why? Because it kept her safe. If she could regulate everyone else, maybe things wouldn't explode. If she could fix it, maybe she wouldn't be blamed. If she could give enough, maybe she would be loved. So she became the therapist friend, the strong daughter, the reliable partner, the one everyone calls. And she really says no, but caretaking without boundaries isn't compassion. It's survival. And eventually she realizes she knows everyone else's emotions but doesn't know her own. Again, who can relate? Because I mean, these are things that the women that I work with, the women in my membership, even just women that I talk to on a day to day basis can relate to. This is the way that oftentimes we describe ourselves with these identities that we picked up as a result of surviving. So I want to go into another one, the peacemaker. This woman hates conflict. It's not because she's soft, it's because conflict meant danger for her at one point in time. It could have been raised voices, it could have been withdrawal, it could have been a cold silence or unpredictability. So she learned to smooth things over, to shrink, to agree, to compromise quickly. She is the one that says, fine, it's not a big deal, don't worry about it, even when it is, even when it hurts, even when it matters, because peace was more important than truth. But peace built on self silencing isn't peace, it's suppression. So another one is the emotionally detached one, and this is the freeze response in disguise. She feels, but very distantly. She intellectualizes her emotions, analyzes instead of expressing, explains instead of experiences. She can talk about trauma calmly. She can describe her, her heartache almost clinically, but ask her what she feels right now, and she will hesitate. Not because and that's because somewhere along the way, feeling became overwhelming. So she numbs, her nervous system numbs. Detachment wasn't coldness, it was containment. And now she struggles to access joy because you can't numb pain selectively. If you numb your pain, you numb your joy, right? Another one of the personalities, and the last one that we're going to go into today, is the I am fine woman. Now, this one is subtle, because she functions, she works, she shows up, she performs, and she's never fallen apart. But she also is never fully present. She says she's fine, even when she's exhausted, even when she's resentful, even when she's lonely, because breaking down wasn't allowed, because someone needed her to be steady, because vulnerability wasn't safe. So I'm fine became her brand. And now she doesn't know how to say I'm not. And again, can you relate to this? If you're watching this, let me know in the comments if you can relate to any of these personalities. When we have these personality traits, it's important to understand that the nervous system behind it all, your nervous system runs on four primary survival responses. And I've gone into this before because this is really the definition, in my opinion, of survival mode, being in these states for an extended period of time. So those survival responses are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and each one can shape identity, right? So your fight response becomes controlling, driven, intense, hyperproductive. Your flight response is restlessness, being overbooked, always chasing the next thing. Your freeze response becomes numbness, indecisiveness, emotional distancing, procrastination. Your fawn response becomes people pleasing, over giving, over apologizing, and being hyper attuned to others. And again, these aren't personality flaws, these are the adaptations that we create as we need to survive. Your body built a character to keep you alive. And if that character worked, your nervous system kept reinforcing it. But here's the critical shift: protection is not the same as authenticity. And just because it kept you safe doesn't mean it reflects your soul. So, what is the difference between protection and authenticity? Protection acts as, how do I avoid pain? Authenticity will ask, what feels true? Protection acts as, how do I prevent abandonment? Whereas authenticity will ask, what do I need? Protection will ask, how do I control the outcome? The opposite of that, authenticity, would be like, what is aligned with me. When you've lived in survival mode long enough, protection feels like identity. You think, this is just who I am. But what if it's who you had to be, and now you're recognizing that it's not the same thing? If your personality has been shaped by fear, you may be succeeding but not from freedom. You may be admired but not from ease. You may be powerful but not peaceful. And that disconnect, this is where it all starts to feel heavy, because deep down your nervous system is still braced even when your life looks stable. So I want to be clear. There is no shame here. The version of you that became the overachiever, she was brilliant. The hyper independent one, resourceful. The caretaker, deeply intuitive. The peacemaker, emotionally intelligent. The detached one, strategic. The I'm fine woman, well, she was incredibly resilient. And none of these parts are wrong. They were built for survival. And if you are no longer in active threats, you don't need to keep living like you are. So one of the things that I do in this training is I give you journal prompts for you to reflect on so that you can take what we're talking about in these conversations further. Take you to the point of awareness, which I talk about as the first step to accident survival mode. Once you have the awareness of these things, you have the opportunity to change them. And that is the goal of this training, to get you into this state of really wanting to course correct so that you can get yourself out of survival mode. So here's the question that I want you to sit with, not intellectually, but somatically. I want you to close your eyes if you need to, and only do that if it's safe. And I want you to ask yourself, what parts of my personality were built from fear rather than freedom? What parts of my personality were built from fear rather than freedom? Where did I become intense to avoid being invisible? Where did I become independent to avoid being disappointed? Where did I become helpful to avoid being abandoned? Where did I become calm to avoid conflict? Where did I numb to avoid feeling too much? And I want you to just notice that. No fixing, no judging, just honesty. Because awareness, again, is the first step to accident survival mode and separating yourself from these identities that have become who you are as a result of what you've been through. So, in the next part, we're going to talk about what happens when you start loosening your grip of that survival identity and why it can feel destabilizing at first. Because when you've lived as protective, like you've lived protection for so long, freedom can feel unfamiliar, and unfamiliar can feel unsafe. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that your survival or your nervous system is learning something new. So let's dig into when survival became your whole identity. We just named the identities that survival built: the achiever, the hyper independent one, the caretaker, the peacemaker, the emotionally detached woman, the I'm fine woman. And here's where it gets deeper. The danger was never that you survived. The danger is that you mistaken survival for self. And I'm going to say that again. The danger is never that you survived. The danger is when you mistake survival for self. There's nothing wrong with surviving. The problem is when survival stops being a season and becomes your whole personality. It becomes your brand, it becomes your reputation, it becomes your role, your value. And that's where protection turns into prison. So let's explore when survival stops being a strategy and becomes an identity. At first, survival is reactive. It's a response to chaos, to instability, to unpredictability, to emotional neglect, to pressure. But over time, something subtle happens. The behaviors that kept you safe started getting rewarded. People started praising you. You're so strong. You're so independent. You're so reliable. You're so driven. I know we have all heard this. You're so mature for your age, even. And then suddenly, the trauma response becomes your personality trait. It becomes praised. So you cling to it. Because if people love you for your resistance or your resilience, who are you without it? So many of us have seen survival become our brand, and we don't talk about it. So, we're going to talk about how this plays out in real life. Survival identity doesn't need to stay internal, it shapes how the world sees you. And eventually, how you see yourself. It becomes your brand. It becomes your role in relationships. It becomes your work ethic, your entire center of worth. So when it becomes your worth ethic, you say, I'm just ambitious. But what's underneath? The truth is, what's underneath of all of that is that you're afraid to slow down, because slowing down means that you are now vulnerable. And vulnerability once meant danger. So you keep producing, you keep achieving, you keep stacking and moving, and because you stay in motion, you don't have to sit with what is unresolved. And the world applauds it, right? Because, like, who doesn't want a driven woman? And they don't see the anxiety underneath the drive. They don't see the fear underneath the focus. They just see results. And the results feel safer than feeling. But we have to be honest with ourselves, it becomes very heavy. Now, when survival becomes your role in relationships, you say to yourself, I don't need anybody. But underneath of that, you are terrified of disappointment because you've been let down before. So you've convinced yourself that you prefer independence. You build a life where you don't have to rely on anybody, and it looks empowered, but sometimes it's armored, and you don't even realize how lonely you are because you've convinced yourself that needing is weakness, right? So I'm just loyal, but underneath you're afraid of being alone. You stay longer than you should. You tolerate more than you should. You excuse more than you should because you're committed to love and because you're afraid of abandonment. And survival whispers, staying is safer than starting over. We end up being the strong ones, but underneath of that, we are never allowed to fall apart. So we don't know how. We don't know how to say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm tired, I can't do this right now, because somewhere along the way we learned our strength is what makes us valuable. And if we stop being strong, what do we have left? I mean, if you're watching this and you relate, let me know. Let me know that you're following along, you know. Um, I talk about this with passion because I lived this for decades. But I don't want to just be talking on experience if you're not feeling it. So let me know as you watch how you're feeling about what it is that I'm saying. So the truth is, when survival is praised, it becomes cemented. It becomes a psychological trap, right? When your survival identity is praised, your nervous system regulates or registers that as safety. Validation equals security, approval equals belonging. So you double down. You become more of the strong one, more of the achiever, more of the dependable one, more of the one who never needs, because it works, right? It gets you respected, it gets you admiration, it gets you attention. But here's the part that no one prepares us for. When people love you for your resilience, it becomes terrifying to imagine who you would be without it. Because you start to ask, if I'm not the strong one, am I still needed? If I'm not the overachiever, am I still impressive? If I am not the dependable one, am I still valuable? If I'm not the caretaker, am I still lovable? That's not ego, that's attachment. You are attached to your survival identity, and your survival identity becomes the version of you that feels safest to present. And letting it go, well, it just feels like losing protection. And this is where the grief shows up, if we're honest. This is the part most people don't talk about. Healing's survival identity is not just empowering, it's grieving, because you're not just letting go of bad habits, you're letting go of the version of yourself that kept you alive. And that version She worked hard, she endured, she adapted, she protected you. So when you start to loosen your grip on her, your body doesn't feel relief at first. It feels loss. It A loss of certainty, a loss of structure, a loss of identity. Because if you're not the strong one, who are you? And that's the question that can feel very destabilizing. So when we are questioning ourselves, right? Like we get to this point of our healing where we recognize who we are is different. There is a subtle identity collapse. When survival becomes your whole identity, you don't know where it ends and where your coping begins. You confuse hyper independence with empowerment, overworking with purpose, emotional suppression with maturity. And you tell yourself, this is just who I am. But what if it's who you became to survive? And that's the point of this. There's a huge difference. And your nervous system feels it before your brain understands it. The real risk isn't surviving. The real risk is building a life around the identity survival created. Because everything you build reinforces that version of you. You choose careers that reward your over functioning. You choose relationships that rely on your caretaking. You choose environments that depend on your strength. And slowly you become indispensable to everyone else except yourself. And that's where burnout begins. And that's the core of survival mode. We're in this endless loop that just burns us out. And it's not because you're weak, it's because you've been living as your coping mechanism, not as your truth. And that goes back to surviving versus authenticity, which we talked about earlier. So the question beneath all of this is, if your survival identity is what made you successful, letting go can obviously feel like sabotage because you start to wonder if soft me isn't impressive. What if resting doesn't make me valuable? What if needing me isn't respected? And that's the deeper fear. If I stop being the strong one, will anyone stay? That's a hard question for people, particularly if you have been groomed from a place of abandonment, right? Like a lot of us who have been in survival mode a long time have an abandonment wound. So when we talk about putting down what keeps people around, obviously we're going to question whether or not people will stay. And we'll be fearful of that because we spent most of our lives avoiding abandonment by abandoning ourselves. So I think it's very important to highlight that integration is not erasure, right? This is not about erasing your survival self, but it's about integrating her, honoring her, thanking her, and then asking, do I still need to live like this? Because surviving got you here, but surviving is not the same as living. Protection is not the same as authenticity. And praise is not the same as peace. So, another journal prompt for you, and I want you to really sit with this, right? Not answer it quickly, and definitely don't answer it defensively. Just honestly, I want you to close your eyes if you need to. I want you to take a deep breath. But I want you to ask yourself, if I stop being the strong one, who would I be? If I stopped overachieving, who would I be? If I stopped over functioning, who would I be? If I stopped rescuing, who would I be? If I stopped proving, if I stopped holding it together, who is underneath of that? Is she softer? Is she quieter? Is she playful? Is she unsure? Is she tender or is she scared? Is she curious? Is she tired? And again, I don't want you to rush to these answers. I just want you to notice because the woman beneath, excuse me, 1 second. The woman beneath survival is not weaker. She's just unarmored. And in the next part, we're going to be going into what happens when you begin living from her because underneath survival identity is not chaos, it's capacity for authenticity, capacity for connection, capacity for rest, and capacity for real peace. But before we get to that, you have to be willing to loosen your grip on who you had to be in order to survive. So you can finally discover who you actually are. So we're going to be uncovering the grief of outgrowing your survival self. We just asked a very confronting question. If I stopped being the strong one, who would I be? And if that answer, if that question stirred something in you, whether it was confusion, sadness, fear, or even resistance, this is why. Because you cannot evolve without grieving who you had to be. Growth isn't just expensive, it's loss. It's the slow, sacred unraveling of an identity that once kept you safe. And here's the part that no one romanticizing. Outgrowing your survival self hurts. It hurts like hell. I think I have cried more over my healing journey about letting go of the woman that I had to become simply because she encompassed so much of my life. Most of my adult years were spent in survival, and I had to let go of the expectations that were built from survival. I had to let go of the girls that were built from survival. I also had to let go of those identities, and those identities are the ones that kept me safe. Coming out of a very young abusive situation into multiple abusive situations after a sexual assault at a very young age, and also being emotionally neglected by my parents. The person that I became was very hard, but she was hard because she had to. And letting that go was terrifying for me because I put up this armor that was impenetrable. Like nobody can get past it, you know? And I had to grieve that. Then you begin to loosen your grip on the strong one, on the overachiever, on the hyper independent woman. You don't feel instant freedom. You feel disoriented because the version of you that had been driving the car for years, she made decisions, she built relationships, she built your reputation, she built your life. So when you start saying, I don't want to live like this anymore, your nervous system doesn't celebrate. It panics. Like, what the hell are you doing? What are you thinking? Because it confuses the identity loss with danger. And that's where grief shows up, right? It's not because something went wrong, it's because something is shifting. And I've done a whole live on this around the loneliness of growth, right? Growth is lonely, not because you're doing it wrong, but because not everyone grows at the same time. So you start softening, you start setting boundaries, you stop over functioning, you stop being the automatic yes, and people feel that. They're like, what is going on with her? And they'll be quick to tell you, girl, you're changed because they don't like it. The friend who relied on you to fix everything may call you distant when you don't answer those calls. The partner who leaned on your strength may call you different and they don't like it. The workplace that rewarded your overdrive may call you less committed. And then suddenly, it's not just you changing, you're disappointing people who benefited from the old you. And it's not cruelty, that's the consequence of growth. But oftentimes, that is what keeps us stuck because we're fearful of the repercussions for putting us first. When you stop abandoning yourself, you disrupt dynamics that depend on it. Okay? And that may feel isolating. And then the other thing that we don't talk about, the other level of grief to this is not just losing the old identity, but it's not knowing the new one, right? Like I've talked so many times about leaving my first marriage and thinking that like naively everything would just drop into place. But what I was left with was I didn't even know who I was. And that was terrifying to me because how can you build a future from a place of like absolute confusion? When our survival identity dissolves, there's a gap. And in that gap, you feel blank, you feel uncertain. You might even feel like you don't recognize yourself because for so long, your decisions were based on what keeps me safe, what keeps me needed, what keeps me impressive. And now you're asking what feels aligned, what feels true, what feels nourishing. And if you've never lived from those questions before, it feels unstable. You're not lost, you're in transition. And that transition feels like being in a hallway between rooms. You've left one space, but you haven't settled into the next. And that in between space, that's the grief. That's the grief of letting go of who you once were. And let's be honest, one of the biggest fears in outgrowing our survival self is if I change, will they stay? Will they still love me? Because many of us were loved for what we provided, right? We were loved for our competence, our resilience, our reliability, emotional labor, our ability to hold it all together. So when you begin softening, you may hear a voice inside say, they're not going to recognize me. They will think that I've changed. They might think that I'm selfish. And here's the truth, you have changed. That is the point. But survival mode taught you that belonging requires performance. So releasing performance can feel like risking connection. That's where the grief intensifies because you might lose relationships, you might lose friendships, right? You might lose roles, you might lose admiration. But what you gain in that loss is alignment. And alignment may cost you approval. But on other side of that, it gives you peace. There's always this subtle guilt, the guilt of being softer, especially if you've been the strong one in your family or in your friend groups, the responsible one, the mature one, the one who had it together. When you start saying, I'm tired, or I need help, or I can't carry this, you might feel shame. Like you're betraying the identity that once defined you, right? Like to go from being the strong one to asking for help, let me tell you, it takes your breath away. And that's real. Because it feels like you're letting people down. But softness isn't a betrayal, it's integration, right? And that's what we work on with my clients. Like it's about integrating the new you, showing up her as her every day. You're not undoing your strength, you're redefining it. And that's where we need to define something important. And what that is survival based strength is reactive. It's fueled by adrenaline. It's driven by fear. It sounds like I can handle it. I can figure it out. I don't need anybody. It keeps you functional, but it also keeps you tense. And it's the strength that clenches, that pushes, that overrides exhaustion. It's strength that survives chaos, but it doesn't know how to rest in peace. Regulated strength is different. Regulated strength is grounded, is conscious, is flexible. It sounds like I can handle this and I don't have to do it alone, or I'm capable and I'm allowed to rest, or I'm strong and I'm allowed to feel. Survival strength protects you, regulated strength centers you. Survival strength is about endurance, regulated strength is about choice. You don't become weaker when you soften. You become more conscious, more discerning, more embodied. And yes, you might lose the admiration from people who preferred you in your overfunctioning. You may lose dynamics that depended on your silence. You may lose identities that once gave you status, but what you gain is something deeper. You gain internal safety, honest connections, energy that isn't depleted by performance, strength that doesn't require suppression. You gain the ability to say, this is who I am and not who I had to be. And that kind of strength, that is what is sustainable. So let's slow this down because isn't just intellectual, right? It's embodied. I want you to place your hand on your chest, just there. And I want you to feel your heartbeat if you can. I want you to take a slow breath through your nose and exhale gently through your mouth. And I want you to ask, what am I holding on to because it once protected me? Don't force this answer. Just sit with what arises. Is it control? Is it hyper independence? Is it overgiving, overworking, caretaking, emotional detachment? I want you to notice where you feel this in your body. Do you have tightness in your shoulders, pressure in your chest? Are you clenching your jaw? Just breathe into that space and ask again, what am I holding on to? Because it once protected you. And then ask this, do I still need it now? And pause. Let whatever surfaces come out without judgment. You don't have to release this all tonight, but the awareness, again, this is the point of these trainings. The awareness is the beginning of your healing process. And this is something very important that I want you to remember. Do not demonize your survival self. She was brilliant, she was adaptive, she was necessary. You are alive because of her. This is not about rejecting her. This is about outgrowing the conditions that required her. You're not discarding the strength, you're transforming it. You're saying, thank you for protecting me, and I'm ready to live differently now. This is not weakness, this is evolution. Outgrowing your survival self is not glamorous, it's not linear, it's not applause worthy, it's quiet, it's tender, it's disorientating, sometimes lonely, sometimes messy. But it is sacred because you are no longer living from reflex. You're living from awareness, and awareness changes everything. You're no longer abandoning who you are. You are integrating her into someone more whole. So, as we start wrapping up this live, we're going to talk about what is it actually looks like to build a life from that wholeness, not from fear, not from performance, not from proving, but from truth. Because who you become to survive, she was necessary. But who you are becoming now is intentional. And I'm going to try to get through this fast. This one is taking a long time, but it was a lot that I wanted to cover. So we just sat with something tender. You place your hand on your heart, on your chest. You ask yourself, what you've been holding on to because it once protected you. And maybe something surfaced. Maybe it was control, overworking, independence, people pleasing, emotional distance. But here's what I need you to hear as we move into this final part. You don't need to destroy your survival self. You need to integrate her. She's not your enemy. She is evidence that you are brilliant. She kept you alive, but now you get to lead. So many women think healing means I have to undo everything. I have to become someone completely different. I have to dismantle who I became. No, healing is not a demolition, it's an integration. Your survival self built strength. She built resilience, she built capability, she built endurance. But what she didn't build was softness, safety, ease, joy, because she didn't have that luxury. She was in response mode. And now you're in creation mode. And that shift changes everything. Survival identity is fear based, as we've talked about. It acts as what keeps me safe, what will prevent rejection, what will prevent failure, what will prevent abandonment. But the authentic identity that we're talking about building, it asks different questions. What it will ask you what matters to me, what feels aligned, what honors my nervous system, what reflects my values. This is a massive difference between living in fear and living from values. Whenever I work with my clients, once we get past that reprogramming stage, like teaching them how to reprogram their beliefs and their thought patterns and their conditioning, the next thing that we do is redefine their values, because oftentimes we're living so far removed from what we truly value because we're following expectations, we're following the conveyor belt of success that we were so at a young age. The value based living is all about being intentional. When you rebuild around values, your choices shift. You don't take a job because it looks impressive. You take it because it's aligned. You don't stay in relationships because you're afraid to start over. You stay because they're safe and reciprocal. You don't say yes because you feel obligated. You say yes because you genuinely want to. Values give you a compass. Fears give you urgency, and urgency is not the same as alignment. So let's talk about this, choosing peace over performance. Because many of you, performance has been your currency. It was mine. I performed competence, stability, strength, being unbothered. But and people applauded me for it. They applaud you for it, but the applause is not the same as peace. Peace doesn't require an audience. Peace doesn't require validation. Peace feels quiet. And you guys are quiet. So if you're in here, let me know that you're following along. Peace feels quiet, sometimes even boring. And if you've been wired for adrenaline, peace feels very unfamiliar. You might mistaken it for stagnation, but it's not stagnation, it's regulation. Choosing peace over performance might look like logging off your computer when you feel the need to continue to push through, or saying no when you couldn't press, letting someone else take the lead, admitting you don't have it figured out, admitting, you know, that letting go is okay. Peace is not passive, it is powerful, and it means your nervous system is no longer dictating your life. Now, this one is big because many of you have been seen only for what you can do, your productivity, your leadership, your reliability, your output. And when someone asks you who you are, you list your accomplishments, your roles, your skills, not your feelings, not your desires, not your cracks, not your softness. You have been admired for your capability, but have you been loved for your presence? Authenticity invites a different kind of visibility. It means letting people see you unsure, letting people see you emotional, letting people see you resting. These are all important. And I know it's terrifying if your survival identity equated usefulness for love, but this is where real intimacy begins. When you see beyond performance and you stay. So I'm going to wrap this up with a visualization exercise. Let's slow this down. I want you to close your eyes if you're comfortable. And again, don't do this if you're driving. I want you to take a deep breath and I want you to imagine the version of you who never had to survive. Not because her life was perfect, but because she was safe. Safe enough to be curious, safe enough to express emotion, safe enough to rest without fear. What does she laugh like? Is it loud? Is it unfiltered? Is it easy? What does she prioritize? Is it connection, presence? What does her mornings look like? Is she rushing? Is she grounded? How does she rest? Without guilt, without checking her phone, without justifying it? All of these questions are important, and I want you to dig deep into this. How does she love? Is she guarded or open? Does she overgive or does she reciprocate? Sit with her for a moment because this is not a fantasy. This is your potential. The version of you exists. It's the version of you that exists inside of your nervous system. She just hasn't had the space to lead yet. Let yourself feel what it's like to inhabit her, even if it's just for 30 seconds. When you breathe it in, this is not about becoming someone else. This is about returning to someone underneath survival. Becoming who you are meant to be is not a dramatic transformation, it's subtle shifts, right? Choosing that job that aligns instead of the one that impresses, finding conversations that drain you or ending conversations that drain you, saying no without over explaining, resting without burnout, building relationships that don't require you to perform. Becoming who you were meant to be means measuring success in by internal peace instead of external applause. It's less adrenaline, more alignment, less proven, more presence. And it will feel strange at first because your body is used to chaos. But consistency creates safety, and safety allows authenticity to emerge. So I want you to remember what we said earlier. You don't need to destroy your survival self, you need to integrate her. She still has wisdom, she still has strength. She is just no longer running the show. She became part of your internal system. So now you can lead from regulation, from values, from choice, from truth. And that leadership feels different. It's not frantic, it's steady. It's doesn't chase, it creates. So as we wrap this all up, I want you to take a deep breath and I want you to ask yourself, if I wasn't surviving anymore, what would I build? If I wasn't surviving anymore, what would I build? Would I build deeper relationships? Would I build a slower life? Would I build a creative project that I've been postponing? Would you build boundaries? Would you build a business rooted in purpose instead of proof? Would you build rest into your calendar like it belongs there? Let the answer surprise you because survival dreams are small. Authentic dreams are expensive. You don't have to survive anymore. You got to design. And that is a completely different energy. Who you became to survive was necessary. But is it who you were truly meant to be? She is chosen, she is conscious, she is calm, and she is ready. So, as always, we're going to bring it home by talking about the survival mode Exodus membership. You don't have to keep living as the version of you that survived the storm. You're allowed to become the woman who enjoys the sunshine. Because some of you have been identified with surviving that you don't even know what it feels like to thrive anymore. You know how to endure, you know how to adapt, you know how to perform and to push. But enjoyment and ease and presence and safety in your own body, I mean, that all feels foreign. And it's not because you're incapable, you know. It's because survival was necessary, but survival was never meant to be permanent. It was a bridge, not home. And if there's something in this life stirring you today, I want you to recognize that you aren't just the overachiever, the strong one, the caretaker, the unfine woman. And that's a powerful insight to recognize. You know, it's all about integration. And that's why I created the Survival Mode Exodus membership. This is not another space to consume content. It's not another checklist. It's not another performance arena. It's a recalibration space. Inside the membership, you do three core things. First, drop my pen. First, nervous system regulation work because you cannot think your way out of patterns your body are still wired to protect. We teach your body what safety feels like. We practice regulation in real time. We dismantle hypervigilant urgency and overdrive. We help you land. The second is identity rebuilding, not from trauma, not from fear, not from proving, but from values, from alignment, from conscious choice. We unpack your survival identities like we've unpacked them here today. We grieve who you had to be, like we've talked about here today. We rebuild around who you actually are, like we've talked about here today. Not the strong one, not the fixer, not the achiever, but you. And there's a community that doesn't require performance. This is the one that changes everything because so many of you have only ever belonged in rooms where you were useful. In this space, you don't have to be impressive. You don't have to be the strong one. You don't have to be the one holding it all together. You get to be witness. You get to be human. You get to be supported without earning it. Survival isn't your personality here. It's your origin story, and we honor it. We don't let you define it. We don't need a hustle plan. We don't need no more pressure. We don't need to become better. We need safety. We need softness. We need a space to evolve without performing. And that is exactly what Survival Made Exodus membership is all about. And this is your invitation, not to become someone new, but to become someone true. So if this is something that's interesting to you, scan the QR code on the screen or drop freedom in the comments and I will reach out to you. Let this be the season where you stop surviving the storm and sit in the sunshine. You deserve that and you don't have to earn that. So if tonight starts something in you, don't rush to fix it. I want you to sit with it. I want you to honor it. I want you to journal. Use these journal prompts that I gave you. Breathe, let it land, and then come back next week. Right? Every Sunday we are here between somewhere between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. GMT, which is 2 p.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. Somewhere between those. And it'll be the same realness, the same depth, The same disruption. Bring your softness, bring your questions, bring your messy, brilliant, tired, hopeful self. This space isn't about performance. This is about peace. And until then, I want you to stay loyal to your healing, rest when it's hard, speak when it trembles, and choose you, even when it's unfamiliar. You are not too much. You are not too broken. You are just shedding everything that never saw you clearly. And I'll see you next week. As you wrap up, I would love for you to leave a note. Let me know what your biggest takeaways were this week. If you have any questions and want to reach out to me, you can feel free to email me at at info at letitiarenee.francis.com. But I will be back next week, and I look forward to hearing what you took away from this experience today. I'll talk to you soon.